Prominent left-wing Twitter accounts have been banned after false reports. Far-right activists have launched a campaign to report left-wing accounts for false violations. And Elon Musk has reinstated banned right-wing accounts like Donald Trump and Kanye West earlier this month. To discuss this and more, we have with us today James Hendler, who's the director of Future of Computing Institute and the Tetherless World Professor of Computer, Web, and Cognitive Sciences at RPI, and is also the director of RPI-IBM Artificial Intelligence Research Collaboration. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor.
My pleasure.
So can you tell us more about whose accounts have been deactivated and why?
The issue being explored is essentially tied to the content moderation. So because Twitter gets so many messages, it uses a combination of human and machine moderation. So for example, certain keywords may be blocked or things like that. And then a human can put in a report that says, I think what somebody has tweeted here violates the rules. When Musk came in, he reduced the number of people who were involved in the human side of that. And then many people from the right wing who really knew how to manipulate Twitter started saying, hey, we can report these accounts we don't like. And, typically what happens is they get taken down until some human looks at them and is able to say, no, it's okay. Because the impact is bigger if you allow, based on laws in a number of different countries, if you allow something to stay up that's bad, that will get you in more trouble than if you take it down and then reinstate it later. So much trolling was done, and that left many people who would be described as left-wing or in a discriminated class. So, in some countries that's religion, in some countries that's gender or race. Those people were attacked and many of their accounts were taken down.
So what happened to Twitter's trust and safety team? And who exactly is now monitoring posts? So you talked about artificial intelligence. Could you tell us a little bit more about the automation, Twitter software? For example, we've recently heard that the software failed to detect newly posted videos of the 2019 attack on mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. And the company only removed the clips after it was alerted by the New Zealand government. So how sophisticated is this artificial intelligence, and what has happened to Twitter's safety team?
So Twitter's moderation has changed somewhat to include a little bit more video, but Twitter was primarily created around textual messages. So what they had is a lot of tools that looked for specific words or content and had sort of filters on them. So there are certain words, and it actually varies by country and other things, the severity. So it really was just taking a fairly simple transcript of what you wrote and saying, does this fail certain filters? Once video started being uploaded, that got much harder, and they have been using more sophisticated tools. The details, of course, have not been shared widely. But what has turned out to be the case was that many of the people who were in their contact monitoring centers were actually contractors. They weren't directly Twitter employees. So Musk was able to essentially just stop those contracts, thinking that his own employees and his own AI technologies would be strong enough to do this by itself. And that's been showing up not to be a very good idea. He also allowed a lot of accounts that had been banned. The best known ones are on the right side, or as we might call it, Trump, Kanye, etc. But there were also those on the other side too, very progressive, etc. Um, White supremacy, things like that. Many accounts got put back on, and then the assumption was that the new moderation would remove them correctly, but it was sort of assuming that people would be using the system fairly, and they didn't really think about attacks and ways that people can create automatic what are called Twitter robots or Twitter, a lot of different names for them, but things that would automatically respond to things and say, hey, that's fake, that's bad, this person is violating rules. And certainly when they were tied to videos and things where a human would typically have to look at the scale, the number of these that are happening per minute is so high that it would take thousands and thousands of people to look at everything. So you need something that triggers it. And what Musk did was he eliminated some of those triggers, and then made it so that when those triggers did go, he had less people to look at them. And so a lot of people whose accounts had been banned or who had been followers of banned accounts worked now together to make other accounts get penalized.
And so, what does this mean for the platform in the future? And how Twitter has been used by activists, many of them from, as you said, the marginalized communities. Black Twitter has used it for human rights and civil rights right here in the United States. And this had been an alternative to controlled, like more tightly controlled mainstream media platforms or corporate-owned platforms. Now, with these major changes, what will become of this? And I ask this from a human rights perspective. We've seen, for example, Facebook and its lack of moderation in countries like Burma led to actual genocide. So in India, Twitter has been, as you said, outsourced a lot, and we've been monitoring and seen how it has been misused in India. In fact, Twitter, there's been a lawsuit filed against the Indian government by Twitter before Elon Musk took over. So, going back to my question, what does this mean for the platform?
I wish I could answer that question, because then I would make the appropriate decisions in the stock market as to what to do and become very rich. Twitter is a very interesting platform because it has a very mixed demographic. So there are other very popular social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook and Twitter being the four in the US that are most used. And of course, there were other ones around the world. And one of the problems is that Twitter probably has the broadest reach in that sense, because it hasn't been focused on a particular kind of advertising or a particular subject, and because mass media has paid attention to Twitter. So something that, say, the President of the United States puts on Twitter will get picked up and be reflected in many other media sources as well. There are some new platforms or some distributed platforms that are being used, but none of them were really ready for the scale that a migration from Twitter would cause. There's already many servers that have gone down, even with just the first people leaving Twitter. So I would say a lot of the world is taking a wait and see attitude, but is very nervous because it has played a particular niche. As we've said, it has been accessible to marginalized communities, it's been accessible to major corporations, et cetera. It hasn't used the targeted kind of advertising that some of these other systems have used, and that's changed kind of its value, and that's what Musk claims he's going to try to push up. But so far, his experiments have not succeeded well, and typically when he has taken over a company or started a company before, there's been a lot of changes at the beginning and then they eventually settle out. And people are just not sure if that's what's going to happen at Twitter. The kind of engineers he brought in were people who were more used to building things than building communications, don't know as much about the social impacts of these things. And of course, Twitter originally was built by technicians and learned it had to have a lot of social moderation. So I wish I could answer your question and say, this is what will happen. Many people have left Twitter. What I'd say is mostly happening is most people are keeping their Twitter accounts, but also creating alternatives and waiting to see what happens.
So one of the accounts that was shut down, Crime Think Inc., says that Elon Musk's rhetoric about free speech is willfully dishonest. In fact, he's purging anti-fascist accounts at the same time that he reinstates neo-Nazis like Bret Stephens and the neo-Nazi blogger who inspired Andres Breivik to murder 77 people. And many activists believe that Musk bought Twitter to run it into the ground. Do you agree?
I don't think he bought it to run it into the ground, but there's a long history of rich people, moguls, buying media, right? You have Murdoch buying up newspapers. You have the people who bought up Fox News and some of the other news stations. So people who get very rich, Bezos bought, Amazon bought the Washington Post. And I think Musk, being very rich, wanted to have a communication media that was sort of under his control. It's not really, most of these people take them over and they move them in a direction. They don't completely manage them. But they've moved them to either right or left or to support one group or another. And many people think that that's really why Musk wanted Twitter, because in the modern age, buying a radio station or a TV station or a set of newspapers doesn't really have the same kind of reach that buying social media does. And certainly Twitter was the only one that had any kind of reachability to be taken over by an individual, even one with as much money as Musk had. So many people think that that's really what was going on, and that now Musk is trying to figure out how he utilizes that. His own personal political leanings are very confusing. One of the first things he did was he started banning people who were criticizing Elon Musk. So, really exactly where it's going to go is hard to say, but there are a lot of people who feel his personal politics tend to be libertarian, and the US libertarian tends to move more towards the right wing than the left wing. But again, we're in early days and people are still waiting to really see.
Do you think Twitter's chaos could make political violence worse outside of the US?
I think Twitter's changes, I'm not sure if I'd say it would make political violence worse. What I think happens is there's less control. Twitter has been learning for years about how it was used, where that led to good, perhaps what we might consider good results socially, but certainly where it was leading to bad results socially. They're bound by certain laws that don't allow specific things in specific countries. Again, in the US, you're not allowed to have child pornography on any media, that sort of thing. So what I think people are scared of is that we just don't know. It will take the reins off of some kinds of political violence, but it will also, there was moderation that was making it a little harder to do things such as what had happened earlier in things like the Arab Spring and stuff like that, where social media platforms were used to organize things. Black Lives Matter, it was a huge aspect, as you mentioned before, Black Twitter. So again, Will it inspire positive social change or negative social change? I think what people are mostly concerned about is that it's become uncontrolled. Obviously, people tend to be more worried about the increase in violence because that has a stronger impact on people and on each other. Musk claims he wants to control that. We haven't seen that yet.
We are hearing from activists and advocates on the ground that point to a wealth of examples of how social media has enabled and enhanced political and ethnic and religious conflicts. For example, mob killings in India to civil war in Ethiopia. So these are some of the things that we'll be exploring more in our show. And we thank Professor James for being here and being a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to talk about something so important.